Listen, this wasn't just a courthouse stroll. This was Prince Harry stepping onto London pavement and getting hit with the coldest, crudest, most brutally honest welcome back imaginable. Not from tabloids, not from Palisades, not from critics on TV, but from everyday people who couldn't even be bothered to shout. Just a silent, savage message, raised middle fingers outside the High Court. And the shock isn't only the gesture, it's what it means. He flew in from California like a man entering a familiar battlefield, expecting the flashbulbs, the chaos, the swarm, the drama. Because let's be real, Harry's life has become one long headline that never ends. But what greeted him this time? Not a roaring crowd, not a wall of cameras, not even a proper protest with signs and slogans. No, it was worse. It was nothing. Just London moving on. People walking past like he was a random businessman late for a meeting. A prince, once the nation's heartbreak boy, Diana's son, the cheeky royal with the grin, reduced to background noise in his own story. And then, the moment that makes your stomach drop. As Harry, dressed in that serious I'm here for justice suit, moved toward the grand entrance, a few people didn't clap, didn't boo, didn't chant. They didn't even speak. They simply lifted their hands and delivered that universally understood signal. A middle finger in the air, crisp and quiet, like punctuation at the end of a sentence everyone in Britain has been wanting to finish. Because here's what the streets were saying without saying a word. Enough. Enough of the interviews. Enough of the documentaries. Enough of the memoir tears. Enough of the endless loop of grievance and revelation and outrage and victimhood served up with Hollywood-level production and sold back to the world like a premium subscription to royal pain. And yet here he is back in the UK to sue again. This is where the story gets deliciously twisted, because Harry's whole narrative has been, Britain hurt me, the press hunted us, the system failed us, we had to escape for peace, privacy, safety. And the logical ending to that story is simple. You leave, you heal, you disappear into a calm private life. But Harry doesn't disappear. He returns, not as a working royal, not as a servant of the public, not as a man quietly rebuilding. He returns as a litigant, a man walking into courtrooms like they're stages, because for him, the fight is never finished. Inside the courtroom, the language is formal. Phone hacking, private investigators, breaches of privacy, serious allegations that deserve proper legal scrutiny. But outside, the public isn't debating legal nuance. They're judging the vibe, the pattern, the exhaustion. They see a man who says he hates the spotlight, yet somehow keeps turning every chapter into a global event. They see a man who renounced the institution, yet can't stop orbiting it like it's the only sun he knows. They see a man who says the British media is toxic, yet keeps coming back to wrestle with it, while his brand, his relevance, his fortune, and his fame still lean heavily on that royal identity he claims was a cage. And you could feel that contradiction hanging in the cold air outside the court. Harry didn't walk in like a man bracing for humility. He walked with that polished confidence, those nods, those little pauses, that I know the cameras are here energy, except this time the cameras were constrained by courtroom decorum and the crowd didn't show up to feed the moment. So what happens when a man whose entire identity has been shaped by being watched isn't being watched? It's like watching a performer step onto a stage and realize the seats are empty. And maybe that's why the middle fingers sting more than boos ever could, because boos mean you matter. Silence means you're fading. This wasn't a dramatic protest organized by activists. This wasn't a press pack pushing a narrative. It was just ordinary commuters and pedestrians basically saying, we've heard it all. We're tired. We're not playing this game anymore. And that's what makes this moment outside the High Court feel so symbolic, so savage, so final. Harry frames this legal crusade as noble, like he's the warrior prince fighting for truth, fighting for safety, fighting for the kind of accountability the royal machine never dared demand. But to many people in Britain, it looks less like bravery and more like obsession. It looks like a man who cashed in his heritage from massive deals, then turned around and kept swinging at the same system while still using it as the engine that keeps him relevant. And the British public, their sympathy isn't infinite. Yes, people once saw him as the wounded boy who walked behind his mother's coffin. They gave him grace, time, love, decades of it. But goodwill can dry up, especially when every year comes with a fresh explosive revelation, a new grievance, a new heartbreak monetized, a new version of the story. Outside that courthouse, you could practically hear the unspoken verdict. You're not the victim anymore. And here's the cruel twist. Harry may have arrived expecting hostility from the press, expecting conflict in the courtroom, expecting to be attacked by the machine he blames for everything. But what he met met on the street was something colder than hostility, indifference, not hatred, not rage, a shrug, a raised finger, a nation that doesn't even feel the need to argue with him anymore. Because when the public stops arguing, it's not because you won them over, it's because they've stopped listening. And standing there, without the full working royal protective bubble, without the institutional warmth, without the wave of palace-backed supporters, Harry looked for a moment like something almost uncomfortable to witness. A man alone, a prince without a kingdom, a public figure trying to command attention in a city that has already turned the page. Inside, the court will dissect evidence and timelines and legal standards. But outside, this story is simpler and far more brutal. Outside, the streets are asking, "What are you still doing here, Harry?" And if the answer is to keep fighting, then Britain's reply apparently is one finger in the air and the rest of the crowd walking away. And the thing nobody wants to say out loud but everyone feels is that this isn't just a legal battle anymore. It's a reputation war Harry might already be losing, not in court, but in the court of public patience. Because while lawyers argue about evidence inside wood-paneled rooms, outside the story has shifted. Once upon a time, Harry walking into a British courthouse would have sparked sympathy, curiosity, maybe even support. Now, it sparks eye rolls, tired sighs, and gestures people usually reserve for bad drivers and politicians they've given up on. That's the emotional temperature, not fiery outrage, not passionate defense, just fatigue. And fatigue is dangerous because it doesn't shout, it doesn't protest, it simply disconnects. Harry built his post-royal identity on telling his truth, exposing pain, demanding accountability. And at first, the world leaned in. They listened to the interviews, streamed the series, bought the book, replayed the clips. It felt raw, shocking, necessary. But there's a tipping point where truth-telling starts to feel like score settling, where vulnerability starts to feel like strategy, where every new chapter sounds less like healing and more like reopening the same wound on purpose, because the spotlight still hits it just right. And that's the shadow hanging over those courthouse steps. Was this about justice or about staying central to a story Britain is slowly trying to move past? Because the monarchy, for all its drama, has a brutal survival skill it outlasts. It absorbs scandal, reshuffles roles, tightens lips, and keeps the calendar full. While Harry fights yesterday's battles in court, the institution marches forward with ceremonies, charities, handshakes, and photo ops that quietly rewrite the present. So the contrast becomes stark. Inside, a prince arguing about the past. Outside, a country already living in the next chapter. Those middle fingers weren't just insults. They were signals. Signals that for some people, the emotional contract is over. The sympathy account is empty. The fascination has curdled into irritation. And the saddest twist of all, Harry came back to demand to be heard. But the loudest message he received wasn't shouted at all. It was delivered in silence, in shrugs, in people who didn't even slow their steps. A prince returned home to fight for his narrative and discovered the audience he thought he still had might have already left the building.